As you'll see in the program, it's called Pakistan Through Foreign Eyes. There were 6 people on the list initially, but we have with us Declan Walsh, the New York Times correspondent, Hasnain Kazim, who is Der Spiegel's correspondent in Pakistan, over there across, and Yasin Musharbash, who is an author written on terrorism and also works for a German publication. Since it's one of our last sessions here, I thought we'd have a little bit of fun and maybe throw it open to the audience, because I know when it comes to the foreign media covering Pakistan, Pakistanis are often very upset about it, and I think for legitimate reasons in some cases at least. But before that, Hasnain and Yasin wanted to make a few comments, so I'm just going to turn the floor over to them. They'll make a few brief comments as they wish, and then we'll turn it over to you guys, and you can grill them as much as you want. Thank you. Hasnain?
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having me here on the panel and inviting me to this wonderful event. It's my first time I'm here, though I've been based in Islamabad for the past 4 years now. As Cyril said, I work for the German news magazine Der Spiegel, which is a weekly news magazine, and for their internet news website, which is Spiegel Online, which is both in German, and on Spiegel Online we have an English website also, but only a few articles are translated into English. And as I said, I've been here for 4 years. Actually, I am of Pakistani origin, or to go even further back, my parents originate from Lucknow, and then my family migrated to Karachi in 1947. My parents moved to Germany in the end of 60s. So I was born in Germany, brought up there, and I'm basically German, Pakistani German. And I learned here, this is the first time I've been living in Pakistan these past 4 years, and unfortunately my term is over, by the way, this year in summer, so I'm leaving. I learned that you have an issue with the dual citizenship, so I had to decide, and I have the German passport. But I have to admit, looking like a Pakistani and also speaking Urdu fairly okay, I had to learn some words though, like, I could only speak Urdu as you speak it at home. When I came here, I learned the words like Hakumat means government, Dushman is enemy. All these words I was not aware of, so I had to learn them. Is a big advantage because you can just sneak through, you can travel, people don't consider you as a foreign correspondent. So it's, generally speaking, a big advantage being of this origin. But, and here I come to the foreign view. My foreign views, and my view is obviously German, is not really liked very much by the people here. Especially, most of the Pakistani public doesn't read my articles because they are in German. But the Pakistani government does, the so-called establishment does. And I do face and have been facing a huge problem actually in the past 4 years, that people keep telling me, Mr. Kazim, you have to be patriotic also. And Mr. Kazim, don't forget to portray a soft image of Pakistan. This is what I've been hearing many, many times, and honestly and frankly speaking, I have to say, no. This is not my job. It's not my job to portray a positive picture. It's also not my job to portray a negative picture, just a true picture. It has to be balanced, and I think it is balanced what I'm doing. But of course, it's also a lot of that what I write is negative. So there is a big difference between journalism and public relation, and I have sometimes the feeling that people who work for the government here and the military don't understand that. Just an example, there was this huge and sad bomb blast yesterday in Quetta. For me, as a foreigner with a foreign view, it seems very odd that we are here, and it wasn't the article, there were articles, some people are wearing badges, black badges, but somehow life goes on, and people call it Pakistani resilient. You can call it complacent also, because you're not doing anything against that. And after a day like this, I cannot write an article on how beautiful Pakistan is. I cannot write an article, travel to Pakistan, come and see beautiful Pakistan. My editors would say you is crazy, and they're right, rightly so. I cannot do that. So it's not only terror I write. Of course, we foreign correspondents try to pick up the interesting, funny, cultural stories as well. On the other side, it has to somehow fit into the picture and portray the whole thing. People unfortunately keep telling me terror sells, and you are always writing terror and Taliban stories because it sells. And I have to really say, no, it doesn't. I mean, I've never ever met any reader in Germany who says, wow, I'm going to buy this issue of Der Spiegel today because there's a terror story from Pakistan. It doesn't. Terror doesn't sell. Even in the number of clicks, if you look at what we do online, people don't really love terror stories. They don't like that. Frankly speaking, if you write a book on Pakistan, for example, sadly, publishers tell you don't put the name Pakistan in the title. And don't use the name terror, and don't use the name, don't put Islam in the, all these things, people don't want to hear about it anymore. They really are looking and longing for positive stories. So, of course, I'm looking for that. But, and the reason people here are complacent, I would say, is that I think you have got used, and many people have got used to all this terror and all this, what is happening. I think even today somebody told me the bomb blast yesterday, well, this happens in Pakistan, that's Pakistan, hum kya kar sakte hain? What can we do? Well, there has to be done something. And then also people tell me, well, terror is far away, it's in Balochistan or wherever, it doesn't affect us, especially us living in the bubble of Islamabad, for example. Well, it does. But I think Pakistanis, people who live here for a long time, don't realize anymore that there are checkposts every few hundred meters, that there are people standing with guns at every corner in the road. There are, even if you want to enter a normal cafe just to have a tea, you get checked as if you're entering an airport. I mean, what is this? This is not normal. This is not normal. This is not normal life. And this is my foreign view, and of course I have to transport that. And if then people say we are not happy with that, I can't really help you.
Thanks for that, Hasnan. I mean, I'll agree with a lot of it, but particularly that Islamabad is a bubble. As I'm saying, this is a lapsed Karachiite. But let's turn over to Yasin, who's written a lot about terrorism, Al-Qaeda, etc. But just before this session, we were talking about how it's his first time in Pakistan, and that he's had to write about Pakistan without having been here or traveled around. I think that's one of the concerns many Pakistanis have, which is that the country, the way it's portrayed or represented or talked about, is often talked about by people who perhaps have no experience with this country. So, Yasin, over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. I'm not really sure I'm helpful because my perspective is very different. I mean, it's not as intimate as Hasnain's for several reasons. One of them being that I have now been in Pakistan for, 72 hours? So I am by no means a Pakistan expert. I will not sell myself as one. And I hope to be one day, but it's not going to be anytime soon, that much is for sure. But I am somewhat an expert on terrorism, international terrorism. And having written about Al-Qaeda, for example, for most of the past 12 years, I couldn't have done that job without also writing about Pakistan, which is a weird situation because I don't like writing about stuff I don't understand. But you cannot write about Al-Qaeda without writing about Pakistan at least a bit, to give people an idea. So I tried, in the pursuit of that task, not to over-interpret anything, but to try and find those few undisputed truths that you can use even if you are not an expert on the country. That may have worked out and it may not, and I wouldn't even have known. So reporting on Pakistan from Berlin is difficult, of course, and I totally understand the shortcomings of it. But I also, before you, absolutely rightly would get excited about it and angry about it, believe me that I at least try to portray a fair picture, or at least a balanced picture. Hasnain said that as well, that he's trying to at least be balanced if he cannot be positive all the time. And I can assure you, by the way, because we've been colleagues before and I'm very acquainted with his work, you probably won't find more balanced and more nuanced articles on Pakistan in the German media than Hasnain's articles. Now, just a very few points to give you an idea what it is like to be a journalist who has to write about Pakistan even though he doesn't want to. A few years ago, when I was still at Spiegel Online, actually, we were trying to put together an infographic online about major terror attacks over the past 10 years. And I had given that task to one of our producers and said, you know, just 9/11, biggest bombs in Baghdad, you know, just collect the biggest terror attacks and let's put them on a map. And then she called me after 2 hours and said, are we including Pakistan? I said, yeah, of course. I mean, lots of big attacks in Pakistan. She said, well, I'm asking for a reason. I said, what is the reason? She said, it's too many. We can't possibly put them on the map. What should we do? And then I said, well, okay, we have to think about this. This may sound bad, but how about we only count the ones with more than 20 people dead? She said, okay. Called me back an hour later and said, still too many. So we raised it to 40, we raised it to 60. In the end, we only put those terror attacks on the map, in the case of Pakistan, with more than 80 attacks. And this, even if you are somebody who writes about Pakistan a lot, I mean, that was one of those moments where it became clear to me what a terrible tragedy you are living through in this country. Not all of you, not all the time, but a lot of you in many times. So I guess, you know, when I had to fulfill that task and write the occasional sentence or two or graph or two on Pakistan, who did I rely on? And I tried to be as open as I could. So I would try and read what people twittered, for example, from here as much as I could. I'd read at least the English-speaking Pakistani press, knowing it's not representative, but I can't read Urdu. I would read Arabic sources on Pakistan to get at least some sort of different perspective. I'd contact friends over Facebook who are of Pakistani origin or have lived here or were still living here at the time, just to kind of balance, you know, what I had to do. It was a difficult task, and to be honest with you, Pakistan is one big riddle to me, and I believe to many Germans. It's a country that is very, very hard to get any sort of idea about from the outside, and I don't mean this, and I'm not judging anything. I'm just giving you an idea that, you know, even if you talk to your editor or colleagues and you discuss Pakistan, there are so wildly different ideas about what this country is, what it should be, whose fault things are, who's running the show, who's responsible for what. It is very, very difficult to get a handle on this country if you look at it from abroad, which is the view that I have held, because, like I said, the first time I set foot on Pakistani soil was 72 hours ago. Given that, it is hard to sell Pakistan in Germany, because, of course, readers of newspapers don't want you to supply them with questions that you can't answer. They want answers. They want the story. And in the case of Pakistan, I found it tremendously difficult to offer that. You know, all I could offer them was a bag of questions, actually a new bag of new questions every week. And as far as I'm concerned, that hasn't changed. I still don't have a good idea about Pakistan. I have seen things that I didn't expect in the course of these 72 hours, and I'm very grateful for it. But like Hasnain has said, this is a country where, you know, people are gathering here and talking about Baluchistan in all openness, and 2 hours later you have 80 dead in Quetta, you know, a terror attack on a scale where most other countries would stop operating for 3 weeks out of shock. So this is a country that is very difficult to understand. I don't know many other countries where that sort of thing happens, and it's only a very low number, I believe, in the world where this sort of thing is true. So, to finish up, I believe that there's no way around admitting that you will find a lot of stereotypes in the foreign press about Pakistan, that's true. But I would also say, at least as a German journalist, I do think that people are trying to be fair and balanced, and I do think that there are severe difficulties in covering Pakistan. It's not out of bad will or because somebody else is directing us in a bad direction. It's because your country is very, very diverse and very difficult to understand from the outside.
Thanks for that, Yasin. I mean, you mentioned that Pakistan's a riddle, but I don't think it's a riddle just for outsiders. Many of us Pakistanis, it's a riddle too. And it's the question about, you know, how do you scale incidents? 20 dead, should you put it on the front page? 15 dead, should you write an editorial about it? Unfortunately, I think most Pakistani publications also and news channels have to wrestle with that on a daily basis. But from someone who's been in Pakistan for 72 hours to someone who's been here for about 8 years, I believe, 8 or 9. Many of you will be familiar with Declan's work at The Guardian, where he was for many years, and now he's the Pakistan bureau chief for the New York Times, which I think is the paper Pakistanis love to hate. So, Declan, over to you.
Hi, it's great to be here. Since I changed from The Guardian to the New York Times about a year ago, people frequently come up to me and they sort of approach me in a softly manner, and they ask me a very pointed question with the tone of someone who's inquiring about a sort of bad bout of venereal disease I've just had, where they sort of say, how is it since you left The Guardian and moved to the New York Times? I suppose in a sense that's, a reflection of the burden of reporting, or the reflection of the reality of reporting for a paper like The Times, which is obviously it's the largest American newspaper in a country like this, where the relationship between the US and Pakistan is something of a national obsession. What I wrote for The Guardian came under a lot of scrutiny. What I write for The Times comes under intense scrutiny, both here and in the US. I suppose it's not to sound my own trumpet, but I think at this point in the last year I've managed to annoy both the authorities here and in Washington for various things. But also, frankly, from people like yourselves. Often meeting people casually, they'll come up and, people in Pakistan are by default extremely polite and friendly, of course, and that's one of the reasons why I love this country and why I've stayed here so long. But people do come up and they, pretty quickly by the third point in our conversation, elide into a discussion about some of the things that have already been alluded to here, the soft image of the country, why do you always focus on the bad things, and so on. And I'm certain that those are issues we're going to discuss with you over the next hour. What is it like working for The Times in comparison with the previous paper? Well, obviously it's the most, in American terms, it's the most internationalist newspaper, with no disrespect to the others, but certainly in terms of the size of the foreign desk, the number of correspondents it has abroad. We have a huge website, I think the most read newspaper website in the world. The paper itself sells over 1 million copies a day, which in a declining industry is still pretty healthy. And from the inside, it is impressively resourced, and the people who I work with, despite what some people think, are quite professional. It's not, I can tell you, run by a cabal of Jews, in case anyone thinks that. But it does, for all of that, of course, that's not to say that it doesn't view the world through an American lens, because it's principally got an American readership, even though with the web that's changing to some degree. And I think one of the interesting things at the moment is that the world's, certainly America's lens, and perhaps to some degree the world's lens on Pakistan is starting to shift. Things are moving in the region. The American withdrawal from Afghanistan is just starting, which is going to have, I think, quite profound effect on Pakistan. The reason that America got so engaged in this region over the last 12 years was, of course, originally the 9/11 attacks and the presence of Al-Qaeda in Pakistan's tribal belt. That is also changing due to the drone strikes, due to other things. And I think that America's interest in Pakistan, certainly at a government level, I think it's going to change and probably wane over the coming years. That will probably also lead to a reduction, I would have thought, in the media coverage to some degree, in the volume, if not in the tone. And I'd be certainly very interested to hear your views on that as we go forward.
Thanks, Declan. I had promised that I'd throw the floor open to people, but just one question I'd like to ask all the panelists before turning to the audience, which is that here in Pakistan, at least, we don't have a distinction between the editorial side and the news side. So it's just one editor who's in charge of everything. And particularly with the Times, and I'm sure with your publications too, there's a sense that there's a wall between the news side and what's the editorial line of the paper and the sort of its approach and things. But as a reader, and as a frequent reader of the Times in particular, I sometimes wonder if that wall is as strong or as sturdy or even as real as sometimes projected. That the paper's editorial line on Pakistan, which is that we're a bit of a rogue, if not a rogue state, is often reflected in the kind of coverage that comes through in the news pages. So just like you to comment on that.
Well, there's actually a very hard line between the editorial pages and the news pages at the Times that surprised me actually. So when I worked at the Guardian, when the editorial writers, they're the people who write the editorials every day and formulate the paper's policy, they would frequently call me and we'd have a chat about something big that had happened and what its repercussions were, what this meant for Pakistan in broad terms, and often the sentiments that I expressed to him would in some shape or form be reflected in the paper's editorial view the next day. The Times actually takes an entirely opposite view to that. There is no contact between the editorial writers, who are an entirely separate body of people, and the reporters, and in fact it's actively discouraged, because there's a theory that never the twain shall meet, that these are two entirely separate gene pools that must never be allowed to intermingle. So that's between the editorials and news, and then obviously you have the op-ed pages as well, but that's also entirely separate to us. So actually the decisions about the tone of content, and people often think that there's a sort of committee of people who meet in a room and decide what our line in terms of our coverage and anything will be, is actually, it's often just the guy that I work for, the Pakistan Afghanistan editor. We're having a chat and we decide what would be an appropriate thing to cover.
And just to then, is there a mic out here for the audience? Someone, while they find that, I think you mentioned earlier that, Pakistan, the focus is primarily terrorism and security related. Just wondering, is there an appetite, and not just speaking for your country and your publication, but in Europe, for example, for other kinds of stories from Pakistan? I think Pakistanis often chafe against the idea that this country is represented in a very one-dimensional way internationally. And I know Declan's tried to write some stories about bloggers and softer issues since he joined the Times. I'm just wondering, do you guys find that there's an audience for that, or are your editors interested in it?
Absolutely, they're absolutely interested in that. We have done stories on for Spiegel and Spiegel Online on all kind of, we have written a portrait on Edi Saab, Abdul Sattar Edi, and we have done cultural stories, even travel stories, which is sometimes tough in these times to do that, because we don't want to discourage people but also not encourage people, because after travel stories, people email me and ask me, I'm planning to go to Quetta also, since I'm there in Pakistan, can I go there? And then I have to give them advice, which I don't want to do because that's not my job. But there is an audience for that, definitely there is. But the problem, if I may add this, for me, as I said, maybe somebody of you can later on tell me, even after the discussion, why is there this obsession in Pakistani public and in the government about the foreign view? Why are you so obsessed with what the foreign world thinks about you? Why don't you just why doesn't the government just do what it has to do instead of caring what the foreign world thinks? I have to mention these two examples. Yesterday I got an email from some military people, and who was also saying he's not very happy with what we do, and then I asked him why. I called him and I asked him, what do you want me to write? What is your positive subject? And he said, why don't you write about that Pakistan has the, I think, 4 biggest mountains in Pakistan. What kind of story is that? And another story which I always like to mention is a very high-ranking diplomat, I'm not giving any names, a Pakistani diplomat told me, why don't you write about Pakistan being the 4th biggest milk producer in the world? What should I do? Should I interview a cow, or what should I do? So this is really weird. And I realize that on one side they're obsessed with what does the foreign world think. On the other side, they have no clue how to sell the country.
Yeah, I think interviewing a cow might be easier than some of the interviews I've had to do out here. But but Yassine, would you like to just add? And as someone who does and covers primarily terrorism, just trying to understand the sort of lens that Pakistan's seen through. Does that impact also sort of how states respond to this country? How does the media sort of narrative, is it shaped by how your governments look at Pakistan, or does your coverage shape how the governments look at Pakistan?
Well, just two comments on that. The first being that German media operate very differently from Anglo-Saxon media in regard to the distinction between opinion and news. We usually do not distinguish. Quite to the opposite. We want the author of the news story to have an opinion and share it. It's a different tradition. It's got historical reasons, but this is how we do it. We do not have a separate editorial board. Quite to the opposite. So whenever Hasnain writes a story, it will still be balanced, but you will every now and then see quite clearly how he sees things, because we trust our readers, to be of a different opinion if they want to. We don't believe that one article will brainwash people. In terms of the agenda, the editorial agenda, or the choices of editors, what they ask us to write about, I mean, it usually starts with news, but then it's up to you, and whatever you got to offer, you usually get to work on, and the more original the approach is that you can offer, the better. But sometimes there are stories that you cannot write around. If the number of people killed in terror attacks in a particular given year is double the number of the year before, or is the highest number in any country of the world, then the milk story is just not interesting. You can offer it, but it won't get through in most likelihood. So of course there is a connection to news, and Pakistan is maybe the fourth biggest producer of milk in the world, but is one of the bigger producers of news in the world, and we cannot get around that as reporters.
I was promised there'd be a chap roaming around the audience with a mic, but I can't see him right now. Oh, is that over there? Anyone have any questions? Anyone want to pummel our audience members? How about the gentleman over there in the Shalwar Kameez? Yes, I believe the mic will come your way.
You said gentleman in Shalwar Kameez.
I'll stand up so you know this is not a Shalwar Kameez, but my name is Junaid, and a lot of how a foreigner would look at you depends on how you would project yourself. And I'm sure that when foreign media is doing their primary research on Pakistan, I'm sure there are a lot of journalists on ground, but a lot of what you read is what Cyril or other journalists out of Pakistan write on a daily basis in Dawn or Tribune or any such paper. To what degree does that have an impact? Because if you look at the Indian media, no matter what, they do not report negatively on India. In fact, this rape story out of New Delhi was really the first time that negative side of India is being projected by global media and Indian media itself. Is Pakistani media itself just holier than the Pope, and do we do more mudslinging on our own country than we really should? And that in fact feeds into how foreigners look at us. Maybe Cyril, your perspective and the foreign eyes perspective on this. Thank you.
Well, I think I'll try not to comment on such stuff. Since the panelists are here, Declan, is the Pakistani media too critical compared to? And I think Pakistanis often like to compare themselves inadvertently or deliberately to India. Do you think, having been familiar with both countries, that our domestic media, and you'll be familiar with the English media, is more critical than your average press in South Asia?
I think the Pakistani media is admirably critical. It's one of the striking things when you land here is just how much criticism there is in the press. And by the same token, it's actually one of the more frustrating things when people come up to you and complain about what we've done, and they'll say, why are you focusing on, this bombing or that event? And I often say to people, just look at the front page of Dawn or look at the front page of any of the other papers. I mean, this is what constitutes news in Pakistan. Why shouldn't it constitute news for the outside world as well? But for all of that, the Pakistani media obviously has developed at an epic rate over the last decade, certainly since I've been here, particularly the electronic media. And actually, one of the things I've noticed is that the boundaries of what is unacceptable to comment on in the public discourse here has actually shifted. I remember there was many years where the whole issue of Balochistan was very underexplored in the Pakistani media. There seemed to be some sort of unwritten pact between editors and their reporters and other people in these organizations that certain things really didn't, it's not that they didn't deserve comment, but they didn't deserve prominent comment or prominent coverage. And Cyril's one of the people indeed who's done a lot of work in Balochistan. So that's been one of the things I've noticed. I think the electronic media in particular has helped to push back the boundaries of what can be spoken about. But there are still some subjects in Pakistan that are not spoken about so much. I mean, I was on a panel yesterday where we were talking about Afghanistan, and there's a lot of talk at the moment about the possibility of opening negotiations with the Afghan Taliban. Obviously, there are also much less serious, in my opinion, talks about opening negotiations with the Pakistani Taliban. But it's really quite striking to me that if you go to Kabul and you hear the view of Pakistan, which is very strongly anti-Pakistani, which sees Pakistan as a state that is deliberately manipulating the Taliban insurgency. Now, I think that's obviously a one-dimensional and an exaggerated view of things that go on here. But by the same token, in public, in the media here, there's not a lot of debate I see about the presence of Afghan Taliban fighters who use Pakistani territory to attack into Afghanistan. I think if that was in the other direction, we'd certainly hear a lot about it here. So anyway, I'm just saying that by illustration of the point that I don't think the media debate here is entirely open, but I think it is impressively so.
Another question, since we've had the lady over there in the red scarf, dupatta. Yeah, there we go. Yes. And it'd be great if you can just introduce yourself too.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sadaf Tariq. I just want to plead a case of a Pakistani against this negative image. What we want of the Western media, because right now we see West as a beacon of open-mindedness and everything else. So we just want a sense of context here when they're reporting on anything. Like there's a lot of background in everything. There's a lot of history, and it's very complicated. Like when my friend said that when we cannot report about Taliban without reporting about Pakistan. So we should not report about Taliban without reporting about US, because it is a product made in America. So it has a lot of context. And the other thing I want is we are victims here. Like we have to face this, and then we have to face seclusion abroad. So that is a real problem for us, and we want at least the intellectuals to understand this and help us out. We need a bit of sympathy also.
Sure, thanks. Hasnain, I mean, that's something that comes up often, which is particularly with terrorism and Yasin, which is that, look, yes, it is here, it's a serious problem in Pakistan, but you, i.e. the West, has helped create this monster and then abandoned us after that. So this narrative that exists in Pakistan, that, look, it isn't just that we're the bad boys, you guys are also to blame. Is there some sense that in your publications, etc., that historical record is put forth often enough?
Well, maybe not often enough, but it is. And I believe that maybe a misperception on the part of many Pakistani readers as well, that we don't talk about these issues. We do. There's probably not a context paragraph about the roots of the Afghan Taliban movement in every news article. That's true. But there will be articles about that, only about that, on that very subject matter, long pieces, in every major publication, every now and then, once a year, maybe twice a year. So it's not like we don't know about these things or don't discuss them or don't try to understand them. I don't think that this is necessarily neglected. Now, I totally understand what you just asked of Western media, and by the way, it is something that I do not consider uniquely Pakistani. My background is in the Middle East, and Middle Eastern peoples, Arab-speaking nations, they complain very much along the same lines about Western coverage of their region. So I do understand the grievance, and I take it very seriously. But then again, I would like to throw back one question at you, at large. What is your main problem? It's not the coverage in the West. Your main problem is that these things happen, not the way anybody else writes about them.
Thanks. Someone over here, the lady sitting in the front. Please introduce yourself too.
Hello, my name is Uzma Nurani. I think, like you started off, the gentleman there, that we don't, like in Pakistan, like you're surprised that 50 people have been killed yesterday. And here we are, we're all sitting silently, and there seems to be no reaction from the government, from the public. And I think it is a state of apathy which we are facing. That is the reason that we're facing the crisis we are. That every day, we living in Karachi, we hear of at least 20 killings a day. Now, any other place or any other people would come out on the streets and protest against this violence, protest against whatever is happening. But in Pakistan, people don't come out and protest. They may sit in the drawing rooms and talk about all these issues, but when it comes out to street power, they do not want to come and face the brunt, and they don't want to come and protest about whatever is happening around them. I think it's time that people realize that these killings and these terrorism is not going to end unless we come and demand our rights for protection, for security, for safety, and it's time for all of us to come out and speak. Thank you.
Since there wasn't a question, I think we'll turn to another more well-known son of Karachi, and perhaps...
Thank you, Cyril Almeida. My question is that what is the take of our foreign journalists on the way that for the last 10 years Pakistan has been fighting this war on terror, and despite the best of the efforts we have seen from the state of Pakistan and I think successive governments also, what is the fundamental wrong in our approach or policy? How was the United States of America in the aftermath of 9/11 was able to have a very people-owned homeland security system? So was it because of the lack of unity of people, their mobility and their organization for putting up a front on the all facets of the trends of extremism, sectarianism, fanaticism and terrorism? So what is your take? Is it basically the lack of ownership of the people that for some reason this could not be either advertently or inadvertently was not inculcated? So what is your take on this? Thank you.
A politician blaming the people. That's no, I'm just kidding, Farooq. You know that. But
I'm blaming myself. I'm blaming myself. I'm saying that have we failed to inculcate this ownership in people?
I'll actually throw that to Hasnain and then to Declan. Do you think that Pakistanis? Sure. Well, just so that they can respond to the question, and I'll come to you after that. Thank you. Okay. Well, we'll be with you in a minute. Hasnain, do you think Pakistanis, as Farooq Sattar was just trying to explain, haven't taken enough ownership, and what the lady also said earlier,
well,
that
this is
we're just jarred by these things?
Very difficult question. I think about that we could talk like do another session on that. Very briefly, I would say the biggest problem was, if I got your question right, is that in the past 10 years it was never really clear on where Pakistan and the Pakistani government stands. I mean, if you start from Musharraf, who said, he was facing the question, are you with us or against us? He was with the US, but then on the background you could hear, well, he's not there full-heartedly, right? I mean, there were other issues, he was under pressure. And up till today, you're not really clear what Pakistan wants, what the Pakistani government... I mean, look alone at this drone strike story, which is a huge story and becoming even bigger since Obama wants to and has increased that. you never really know what the Pakistani government stance is. I mean, on one side they criticize it, then you hear this and that, you read papers and get documents, and even unofficially they admit, yeah, well, we think it's a good thing to do. I think this is something which is very confusing and doesn't really help to bring Pakistan forward in what it wants.
Declan, I mean, just on a related note, or maybe slightly unrelated, but there's also the sense that Pakistan is often presented as a caricature in the foreign media, which is it's either fashion weeks or it's terrorism, and that the real Pakistan, ordinary Pakistanis, their lives, their existences, the things that are important to them, don't get covered. And like I was saying, you've tried to write about these other softer issues. What kind of response have you got to that? And then we'll take a question from
I've had a pretty mixed response. Last year I wrote a piece about Karachi Fashion Week and the launch of Hello magazine, and I instantly got inundated with people asking me why I was writing about such frivolities and why wasn't I writing about serious things. And by the same token, when I write about something more serious, they say, why do you talk about... I mean, the reality is, of course, that there is no, to state the glaringly obvious, there is no one Pakistan. There are many Pakistans that exist side by side, and often as journalists, I suppose our responsibility is not to reflect one or the other, but to try and present all of them at various times. And it's an unfortunate fact that here in Pakistan, violence, which is a driver of the news business, if you like, all around the world, is important because people being killed is a significant, I mean, again, to be, state something really obvious, people being killed is a significant thing. Last night I was about running out to dinner, and I get a call from my editors, and they said, 25 people apparently have been killed in Quetta. By the time I got around to checking my computer, it had gone up to 47. By the time we filed the story, it had risen to 67. It's very hard to know why someone... I mean, that's a really unpleasant story. It's a terrible event. It's a reprisal of something that happened just 1 month ago in exactly the same place against the Hazara community, who've been suffering these sort of attacks for over a year now. And it is difficult sometimes to deal with the argument. People are saying, why are you always focusing on the negative? Well, would you rather that we didn't? Would you rather that we pulled that story and wrote about the milk industry or the highest mountain or whatever? So, but all of that said, I can understand people's frustration, that they feel that because a bomb went off in Quetta, it doesn't invalidate your existence as someone who leads a perfectly normal sort of suburban life here in Karachi, and you go to work and you hang out with your friends and you like watching movies. So I can understand people's frustrations, but it's a complicated issue about the responsibility of the foreign media to try and reflect all of those realities at the same time.
May I add one thing to that?
Yeah, sure.
Just
sure,
the only thing I would like to say is, I don't understand the frustration, because I would understand if you were first frustrated with the incident, with what happened, but being frustrated with the reporting on it, I don't understand that. I don't get that.
The gentleman in the purple or the white shirt. Sure, I'm just trying to go across and trying and get as much as a sample. We'll come back to you guys. Here, the gentleman in the white shirt.
Hi, thank you for visiting Pakistan, Kazim and Yasin. I'm not really have a question, but I would like to lend support to the speakers here, because I think you're in a bit of a fix facing the Pakistani audience. After 30 years, we're still living in denial, thinking that America created the Taliban. America financed it. It was manufactured by Pakistan. We should start admitting our own faults. Secondly, thank you so much for covering the issue of Malala, as the foreign press did, and making an international hero out of her, because we would have forgotten about her as we did back in 2008. And otherwise, the fact that we continue to live in denial, and Kazim initially asked, I'm sorry if I'm getting your name wrong, it's Kazim, right? Initially you asked a question, why our officials are so obsessed with how the foreigners view us. Well, the parliamentarians are here, they'll give you the official answer. But as a common man, I think they're obsessed because our economy, our military is based on foreign aid. We finance our institutions by increasing our internal trade deficit, and then we rely on carry legal bills and other bills to bring in the foreign aid. And I think if we were really worrying about our own people, then the Hazaras would not be sitting for 4 days to get justice. They would not be even sitting for 1 hour to get justice. So I think that's another reason. Our leaders don't look towards our vote banks. They finance their political campaigns by getting the foreign aid. So just a bit of words of support to you guys. Thank you.
Well, there you go, a sympathetic Pakistani. Not too often that happens.
We
A
planted
question. I'd like a question from someone. Who has a question? Oh, here we go. I'll come back to you. Sorry. No, sorry, the lady in the gray. And please introduce yourself. And a question.
Okay, I'm your Facebook friend. My name is Seema Niaz. Anyway, my question is to you, Mr. Delkin Walsh. What do you see as our post-election scenario? You're a very mature journalist.
Let me.
You're caught now.
Yeah, let me pull out my crystal ball. I've no idea. I mean, clearly it looks like it's going to be a coalition government. That's inevitable. But beyond that, gosh, what could one predict really?
Is there much interest in the Pakistani election?
Not so far, no.
No,
I mean, that's not really. It's sort of a marker, but not yet. Yeah.
Okay, my question.
Yeah, the girl in
is
blue.
there a
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Madiha Javed, and my question is that is there a demand in foreign countries for having stories which pose Pakistan as a more Islamic state? Because I'll give you an example. 6 months ago, there was a story on Tribune website about a blogger who went to a restaurant and he was sitting with his wife with his hands on her shoulders. Within hours, that story went on to one of the biggest newspaper websites. I'm not just talking about one newspaper, I'm talking about more than one newspapers. And I mean, how can you pick up a blogger story and make it one of your main web stories? So we see that this trend goes on and on, that you, like the foreign media picks up stories which make Pakistan a more Islamized nation. So why do we see this trend? Is there a demand in West which wants to see Pakistan as a more Islamized nation?
You didn't happen to write that blog, did you? But Yassine, about sort of creeping fundamentalism within society, extremism, just sort of that representation, is that a big deal?
Well, I will try and not sound. Can you hear me? I'll try and not sound cynical. I mean this seriously. People in Europe, or I can only talk for Germany, really, they don't really have a vision for Pakistan. They don't have an idea of what they want it to be like. So they'll take it as it is. They just want to know about it. So what you're talking about is an alleged misrepresentation, and that's fine. It's a journalistic problem, and we should talk about it. Although I don't think that one of the two colleagues here was involved in that particular incident. But because your question was, is there a demand for such story? No, there is not. I don't think so. Nobody has ever asked me the question, can you write something about how Pakistan is becoming another Iran or another Saudi Arabia? No, that hasn't happened to me. That would point towards a hidden editorial agenda, I believe, is what you're aiming at. I have never come across it.
Can I add something to that,
question,
please?
And please.
No, can I just add?
I'm sorry.
Which is important
and then the
to me,
lady in
because I really need to address this question. No, I can agree. There's no demand for that, since especially my readers and the readers in Germany there are hardly any Pakistanis, by the way. I mean, it's a small Pakistani community. So I write for a German public, and they have, as Yassine said, no idea. But what I realize is, yes, there is an Islamization in Pakistan, and why shouldn't I write that? Because that's how it is. I came here 4 years ago, and I mean, how many blasphemy cases did we have? Big issues. We had Malala, I mean, this and that. Last year, I had a discussion, a panel. I was moderating it with Pakistani parliamentarians. And in the preparation for that, it was on Pakistani politics, and they told me, well, we can discuss about Pakistani politics. You can ask any question, but do not ask us anything about blasphemy. And I was shocked, because if this is the case, it shows that the radicals have already taken hold of their minds. They are scared. I understood their point. They said, well, there are 400 people in the public listening to us. We don't know who's there. Maybe we'll get killed tomorrow. I got their point, but this is the state of this country, and so there is a radicalization.
Sure. Question from over here. Sorry, I'm sorry. The lady in yellow. Yeah.
I forgot, but one of you said that the U.S.-Pakistan relations are our national obsession. As far as that is concerned, one of the biggest bones of contention today are the drone attacks. So has any of you covered the story of the drone attack victims, the families, the way the US press keeps perpetuating stories of 9/11, sad stories, emotional stories? Have you ever covered that? And why not?
Declan, I think that's for you first, and maybe Yassine. Has the Times covered drone victims and their families? And
it has, yeah. I'm not about to make myself popular with you here. I mean, if you know, so the whole drone debate here seems to be in Pakistan is politically really poisonous. You know, people actually don't come at it from a perspective of the facts on the ground, and that's partly a product of the fact that it's very difficult to get good information, not just for us, but for the Pakistani media, about what happens in Waziristan after drone attacks. And the whole issue of civilian casualties has become a very emotive issue for people, I understand, but it's also very complex in the sense that it is tied up with issues of sovereignty, about what the Pakistani government, what role it's playing in the drone attacks and so on. So I think what's interesting in the US, though, is that now I sense is that the whole issue of the casualties and so on is actually starting to get some traction as an issue in the US, because Americans are starting to think about what these drones are not just a sort of distant tool of foreign policy, but they're becoming very present in American life as well, in daily life. Police services are starting to use drones. Other civilian authorities, people are having privacy concerns for themselves, and that's starting to feed into, to some degree, the debate about the use of drones abroad, also the issue of the legitimacy of the drones, which I think in a sense is the real issue, about what sort of oversight there is, how it's possible that an intelligence agency is able to carry out what is effectively a targeted assassination program in another country. So I think in the long term, those are the sort of the bigger issues about the drones in a way.
Yassine, if you.
I couldn't help but find a bit cynical when you asked us, have you written about the victims and why not? Well, we have written about the victims. Actually, Hasnain and I, together with a couple of colleagues a few years back, did a huge report on the droning campaign, and we did several reports. We divided the problem into several issues. And Hasnain wrote a big piece, one of the earliest ones in German, about the impact on the civilian society, on the victims and the victims' families. And just to give you an idea of how we like to work, if we get the time to research properly, that particular report had, I think 11 segments. Yeah. We had interviews with drone pilots in the US. We had a foreign policy piece on US-Pakistani relationships. We had a piece on how Al-Qaeda views drone strikes and what they make of it. We had the victim story that Hasnain did. So we really did a 360-degree view on the entire problem. And I believe our main job as journalists is not to supply people with an opinion that they then should follow. It's to supply people with enough information so that they can form their own opinion. So this is what we try to do in that case.
Sure. Since we were a bit tardy starting, I think we have another 5 minutes perhaps to go. We'll take a few more questions. The gentleman in the yellow over there. And a question, please.
Thank you. The Pakistani media has been very influential lately in murder case that happened in Karachi, and we've been lucky enough to get the victims back in Karachi as well. Has the foreign media been able to look after Afia Siddiqui or any of those many others, if we know about them, and they are being covered by these speakers or the New York Times?
About Afia Siddiqui?
Yeah.
I've written extensively about Afia Siddiqui, but when I worked for The Guardian, it's just not been such an issue since I've worked the last couple of years, since she's been incarcerated. Yeah.
Same with us. We had in Der Spiegel, we had a big story, which was actually before I came here. Somebody else wrote that, and then I've been covering it also once in a while. But as Declan said, it's not been an issue recently.
The lady over here, sorry,
जी सॉरी हमारा एक लफ्ज़ बन चुका है, बहुत कुछ हो जाता है, सॉरी कह देते हैं. मैं अपनी कौमी ज़बान में ही बात करूँगी. If you understand me kindly.
I think you'd have to speak in English because for the participants.
I'm victimized of this terrorism. The politicians also sitting here I also worked in 28 years in government department, and I'm senior journalist of Pakistan. I'm just telling you, I'm now zero because my son-in-law targeted in 19th May 2012. It is now 9 months ago. Today I came out from this trauma. I ask you question, all journalists, that what the suggestions of these target killing in Karachi and NWFP. Many human beings, many women are going widows, many children are going orphans, but nobody come forward from government side and nobody come from NGO side. Not is the only Malala. I have also two daughters and one son of my daughters. They are also Malala. They have also everything. We looking after, but nobody came here. And today Farooq Sattar is sitting here. I just questions also her, because you also say that government is complaining us.
Sure.
I say that every man have their now the time is come for self-help basis, because everybody come out and please help the human beings in Karachi and WFP. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry about your loss. But Declan, are your newspapers and foreign publications interested in sort of the violence in Karachi, which is just a level of criminality, 20, 15, a dozen people killed every day, not necessarily in bomb blasts, but through various elements. Is Karachi a story of interest, and what's happening here?
Much to my regret, I would say in broad terms it's not, largely because Karachi is seen as something that, I mean, personally I see Karachi almost as a city-state. It has its own enclosed politics which are quite isolated from the rest of the country. And unfortunately for Karachi's sake, until now at least, those politics of ethnic violence, criminal violence, political violence here have not connected with the sort of foreign interest in Pakistan. And I think that's been, I mean, I don't say that with any pride, I think that's just a recognition. And even actually looking in the local press here, I remember when I came to Pakistan, I was so struck by the fact that you would see on page 5 of Dawn, 3 columns down, 2 inches in, some tiny report saying that 12 bodies were pulled out of gunny bags in Karachi yesterday and so on. And I think that's just an unfortunate reflection of the fact that at times in this city, violence is a daily occurrence. And the other problem is that it's just frankly so complicated. When you're here, even among most of you, I'm sure, are from Karachi. If I were to ask any of you to try and unpick for me what's going on here on any particular day and to try and explain the various forces of what's going on, I think even you would probably struggle. So it's also a reflection of that.
Yes, in please.
I just want to say one sentence, because this is where I feel I can come in as somebody who's been writing about terrorism and not about Pakistan. First of all, I'm sorry for your loss, of course. And I just want to say one sentence about this. Among the crowd of people who are reporting about terrorism professionally, there has been a debate over the past 2 or 3 years that's really picked up. And it's about the question, are we reporting too much about the perpetrators and too little about the victims? That is a very difficult journalistic question, because, to put it brutally, victims are usually not the story. The story are the terrorists. But what does it say about us or about our publics if all and every one of us would recognize at least 10 names of the 9/11 perpetrators, but not even 10 names of the victims of 9/11? So I think that, it is a question that every journalist should ask himself every now and then. Do I write about the victims enough? Because terrorism is not just the act that the terrorist perpetrates, it's also the void that he leaves behind and the marks that he puts on a society. So I don't have a conclusive answer to that as a journalist yet, but I try to cover victims more often than I did in the past.
I can see that there's a bunch of questions still, but the organizer indicated our time's up. I'd just like to thank our panelists. It's not very usual for journalists to be, particularly foreign journalists, to be well received in Pakistan, but I hope it was fun for you guys and also for the audience too. Thank you very much.